Welcome to Funny They Don't Look Jewish, where Judaism appears in the panels. Our purpose is to find characters, stories, and issues of comics that explore explicitly Jewish content. I'm Henry Bernstein.
I'm Brandon Bernstein.
No relation. Brandon, we're back talking about the Golem. We left everyone on a cliffhanger last time.
I know something feels wrong, Henry. It hasn't been months and months between sessions. Are we sure we should be continuing?
Yeah. It hasn't been 6 months. We haven't changed Jewish New Year's.
Yeah, in between episodes. But yeah, exciting.
We're even in the same daylight savings frame. That's going to change in a couple weeks. So.
Yeah, true. By the time people are listening, maybe we'll be beyond it. But for right now, We're there. Absolutely. It's good to see you, my friend.
Great to see you. Great to do this once again. Finish up our discussion on Marvel's The Golem.
Absolutely. Yeah, we are wasting no time because we know you're at the edge of your seats trying to figure out, listeners, what's going to happen. The Invaders, Captain America and his team were captured by these Nazis. We have this brother, the Golem hasn't even appeared yet. We have this young man, Jacob Goldstein, Goldstein, who is just, what's going to happen to him? We are here to tell you the answer, and we're going to kick it off. Henry, why don't you tell us the issue we're looking at first?
Great. So we're looking at Invaders number 13 from November 1976. The Golem Walks Again, written by Roy Thomas and Ed Summer, penciled by Frank Robbins, inked by Frank Springer, colored by George Roussos, lettered by John Costanza, and edited by Roy Thomas.
I want to say, I am so curious about why it is that comic writers love the idea of a moving golem. Because, between last episode and this, I just want to review some of the issue titles that we have gone through. Among Us walks the Golem. There walks the Golem. The Golem walks again. We get it. Golem walking, really exciting for a comic book.
Right, none of them say the Golem stands against the wall.
Right. It's movement. I guess it's otherwise it would just be a statue and you're not that impressed. It's the fact that it's moving is what shows you it's a golem, I suppose.
The golem falls and crushes his master to the last
one. When you let it get too big, that's what happens. Absolutely. Yeah. So we pick up with our heroes taken captive by I believe a brand new bad guy appearing for the first time. A man who goes by both the name Colonel Eisen, but also the Face.
Yeah, I gotta say, kind of a cool name and a cool look as far as deformed supervillains go.
Yeah, what's he look like, Henry?
He's got half a face. He's in his Nazi uniform, and half of his face is sort of stitched together, and he looks sort of like a scary bald Nazi, a little like Voldemort-esque. And then the other side is covered in sort of like a Doctor Doom / Darth Vader sort of, Man in the Iron Mask helmet. It's kind of a cool look.
It's almost like he's got kind of like an Iron Maiden on his face or something.
Yeah.
It's not like a mask that fits his face. It's like he has a giant half of an iron dome over half of his head. More or less.
Right. It's sort of like it's got buckles, and it's sort of covering his head, it's not like a mask that has features in it like Doctor Doom or Darth Vader, like I used as an example. But
yeah.
It's a neat look, though. It's a cool design.
It's a cool look. There's a degree to which it almost looks like his head is inside a half-open Death Star. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. There's something also a little MODOK-y about it. MODOK makes me laugh every time. So.
A lot of love for MODOK in all his various forms. He lets Captain America know, my partially iron features were a gift from some sulking Jew. One who objected to the treatment his people were receiving at my hands and hurled crude homemade bomb. I love the idea that it's showing Jewish resistance, right? This guy throws a bomb at this dude's face, and because it's the Marvel universe, it's now this guy's just a super scary dude called the Face because of what happened.
Yeah. By the way, your German Colonel Eisen is a lot like the nihilists in The Big Lebowski. That's
Yeah,
not a
well,
criticism.
yeah. I mean, he believes in nothing except power, I suppose.
He believes in nothing. He believes in nothing, Labolsky, nothing.
The caption lets us know that General Colonel Eisen, or the Face, is a Gauleiter, which is a type of military commander, and he's the military commander of a city, and he describes himself as the Gauleiter of the city of Warsaw, including its Jewish ghetto. So that got me curious. Wait, was this a real position? And there are lots of Gauleiters that served the Nazi regime, and many of them died, and many of them were brought to trial. But I wanted to look up: was there ever a Gauleiter of Warsaw? So the Nazis had set up in Poland something called the general government. It was basically, right, like the Nazi government controlling Poland after the invasion. And throughout their occupation, they had 4 different districts, of which Warsaw was one of them. I know that there was Ludwig Fischer was the Nazi governor of Warsaw all the way from 26th of October 1939 until August 17th, 1945. So the whole way through. And there was another military commander, Erich von dem Bach-Zalewski, who was, let's see if I can pronounce this, SS Obergruppenführer, assigned
Nice.
to quell the ghetto uprising during the time of the Warsaw Uprising. But he came in later. So I don't think there was ever a Gauleiter of Warsaw, which is why they could create this position and be like, all right, yeah, it works. But like, there certainly were these like various Nazi operatives in charge. So like in the Marvel Universe, here's the super villainous one.
Cool.
And thank you.
I mean, not cool, but
yeah.
You know what I mean.
Yeah, it's like fun to see them create. By page 6, we have the Face letting us know that like he's not just an ordinary Nazi, he's like a really vicious one, because he's wishing that there was no wall at all, no ghetto, but only thousands of unmarked Jewish graves. He's like very like clearly showing us like this is an awful guy. On page 11, the Face is complaining about the fact that he has this liquid called heavy water that was mysteriously stolen from his warehouse, and he doesn't know what happened to it. And as he's describing it, we switch over in the next panel to check in on our buddy Jacob Goldstein. And Jacob is poring over a book by candlelight. At his feet, you see another book with a Star of David on it, so you know these are Sforim, these are Jewish books he's looking at. And right next to him is this crate full of what looks like water that's kind of bubbly. The crate has a swastika on it, so like there's the stolen water. It somehow got to Jacob. And he's saying, I was right. These ancient Kabbalistic texts contain the secret I was seeking. Once again, like certainly Kabbalah is old, but like, you know, most Kabbalistic texts we're talking about like from the 12th century, or sorry, most Kabbalistic texts we're talking from 13th century or later. So
not biblical times.
They're old, but not quite ancient. But anyway, yeah. And you could probably have guessed it based on this episode, listeners. What is Jacob doing? He has some special clay prepared because he is planning to make a golem. And you see in like the bottom corner of the page, he has this like clay that's out. It's kind of in the shape of a man. He's holding a book. He's got the water nearby. And so we have this special clay, which got me diving in the research hole, Henry. And I wanted to let you know that I went back to our good buddy Gershom Scholem, diving once again into his scholarship and his work. So we're back on the Kabbalah and its symbolism. And in it, Gershom Scholem lets us know that from various historical resources, there are 4 main sources that we have about how to make golems, meaning there are references to golems, but there's 4 main sources, according to Scholem, of how do you make the golem, right? So I'm going to go through them very quick. First, we have from Rabbi Eliezer of Worms, who is sometimes known as Harokeach, or Eliezer Harokeach. This is a rabbi from the late 12th and early 13th centuries. Eliezer of Worms, he wrote a commentary on Sefer Yetzirah, the book of creation, and he says that it requires 2 to 3 people. They take virginal mountain earth, they knead it in running water, they form a golem out of it, and then they recite various combinations of the Aleph Bet with various vocalization sounds, specifically 221 of them. If you do the sounds in one order, it makes a male golem. If you do them in the other order, it makes a female golem. So that's one. There's also this book called Pseudo-Sadia, which it was a series of commentaries on like the books of Ezra, Nehemiah, and Daniel that originally was attributed to Sadia, and people thought Sadia Gaon, but scholarship has proven not actually Sadia, so he's known as Pseudo-Sadia. He says you make a creature from virgin earth, you knead it and bury it. You have to bury the golem and then walk in circles around it reciting alphabets, and then he's going to rise up. In the 14th century, there's a Munich manuscript. It might be earlier, but at latest the 14th century, it says you take fine earth and you kind of keep combining it and working on it until you receive divine inspiration. Shefa comes through you, and then you take a bowl full of pure water and a small spoon, you fill it with the earth, and you have to know the exact weight of the earth as you stir it and the exact measurement of the spoon. It's like all this like intense mental math that you have to be doing, and fill it and scatter it, and you blow over the water and you start to blow the spoonful of the earth, uttering part of God's divine name, pronouncing it in a single breath until he can't blow anymore. And you kind of continue doing that with combinations to sort of like forming all the different parts of the clay figure until a figure removes. And finally, in the early 14th century, there's an anonymous Spanish author who lets us know that creating a golem is not actually a corporeal process at all. It is purely a mental construction. So these are like the 4 main instructions. I probably went into it too much, but like the cool thing is there is an instruction that says you take the clay, you make a shape, you combine this like mountain earth with running water, you make a golem. That seems to be what's going on here.
I have this picture of people like, doing dishes, listening to the podcast, driving, and be like, wait a minute, I can make a golem. And then, slowing down your instructions and trying to...
Yeah, pause. We have to go back. Honey, pull over. We have to grab some of this virgin earth. Yeah, it's like such a strange experience.
It's, this whole thing of the golem is like, it's really just, it's amazing that it is such a part of Jewish pop culture because it's such a not traditionally Jewish concept. Like, it's amazing that the golem as a concept exists because, like one of the first 10 of the 10 commandments is do not make graven images, right? Like it's
right.
It's just it seems so everything are taught about, we don't put stained glass windows in our synagogue of human figures. We don't put, have statues of Moses around. But here they make idols to kill our enemies. It's a very interesting concept.
I think, so much of it comes back to the creation story and the Jewish understanding that Adam was created from Adamah, was created from earth. So it's right in the creation story, this idea that God shapes Adam out of the earth and breathes divine life into him. So what happens is in the Jewish mystical tradition, you get this idea that it is good to imitate God, right? With this concept of imitatio Dei, what God does, we do as well. So if God creates, we can also create, but we don't have the divine power God does, which is why you have to do all the circles and the recitations and the incantations to get God's power to create the world the way God did through the way God created the world was through words and language. So you use all this and you're able to make it. But one thing that most of the golem stories I encountered, almost everyone that I found, seem to agree that golems don't talk, because that's part of the difference. When God creates something out of the earth, it can be a human being who talks, but we're not not that good. We can do an approximation, but not as good, which is why the golem is this hulking, lumbering, kind of like a human, but not really, because human beings aren't ultimately God, even though we're doing our best to be like God.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Just fascinating
I
concept.
totally agree. And also the popularization we're going to get to a little later.
Right.
It's one of the surprises I have for you. So we get to this golem creation that feels almost part Frankenstein because we start seeing like it's raining. Jacob is like shaking his hands at the heavens. He pours liquid from the jug, this like the special water that was stolen from the Nazis, and he's like pouring it into the clay and then shaping into a human. And Jacob claims it's fitting for the strange liquid to be used, I guess just because it's like this thing the Nazis valued is used to maybe take them down. So he, of course, in English letters, writes the word MF, EMETH, on the forehead and says, "And now, dear God, if you hear prayers, if you care for your people, let there be life." Mm-hmm. Right? And we get this like powerful, I like the "if you hear prayers," it reminds me of sort of like in the Amidah, like a Tashomea, right? Like you hear the prayers, right? And then we get this image that like it really looks like it's a scene from Frankenstein.
Yeah.
With this tower with a Star of David at the top and the lightning is striking. It's like, It's cool, but it's so weird.
It's like everything's there except it's alive.
Yeah. Because instead of it's alive, it's let there be life.
Right.
So the shop is struck by lightning. People wandering around, both Jews and Nazis, are kind of like shocked to see it. The Nazis are trying to get the Jews off the street. And then on page 15, the giant golem emerges from the rubble.
So awesome.
Yeah.
I love this version of the golem. This is I think my favorite golem version so far. Like he's got the Emmet on his forehead. He's got payas, and he's sort of like, he's not quite just the Hulk. He's sort of or Gray Hulk. He's sort of looks a little clay-y, like not, but he still has definition, which I like. Now, I don't know why he has a ripped shirt and chest and arm hair, but I don't know. I kind of like this one.
It seems to be like the narration lets us know that this isn't quite a golem and it's not quite Jacob, but it seems to be like a merging of the two. So my guess would be the ripped shirt is like Jacob's undershirt, right? Like
they kind of Hulk-eyes. Yeah.
Which, like, I get it. It works for the comics. It's visually, it's totally fine. So as it comes out, a Jewish woman there like calls it for what it is. It's a golem there to protect us. And the Nazi seems fully aware of the foolish Jewish legend, right? These foolish legends that Jews have. And of course, the Nazi cannot hurt the golem. The golem beats the crap out of the Nazi. And on page 16, brings that woman that he just rescued to an older man who's there. The older man also recognizes him by the word on the forehead, seeing MF truth, and so knows it's a golem. And the old man responds, "You're the golem, one of those who it is foretold will come to help us in our hour of need." This is the one piece of the golem legend that like I didn't quite get to find a source for. Like, is this just like cool comic book stuff saying the idea of like it's foretold he'll come? Or are there versions of the golem story that say like, we read one earlier from Marvel, right? That said like legend says the golem will be back when we need it.
Right.
So maybe I just need to go a little further through things I see. Then at the bottom of page 16, the golem just straight up walks out the ghetto, out the Warsaw ghetto, by walking through the wall and just like shattering pieces of it.
It just makes a golem-sized hole right through the wall. I love that. He just walks right through. He's not charging through. He's just strolling on through. Like he does not give a you-know-what.
I feel like he could join X Factor because Jay and Miles Explain the X-Men have this joke about how like X Factor never go through doors. They always burst through walls. They don't know how doors work. True? And they're like, the golem's the same way. He just like bursts through the walls whenever he wants to.
That's funny. For a long time, there was a joke about Superman about that, because in the 1950s show with George Reeves, he would always burst through some terrible, plaster wall. It was like, but the door and the window are right there. Like, why is Superman?
But it's not as impressive. Why not go through this? Right? Superman just is keeping in mind the like cleanup crew that's going to get paid for doing this. It's providing jobs.
Oh yeah, right.
So where does the Golem go? On page 22, the Golem heads to where all the heroes are being captive. It drops down a dungeon to free the invaders, and the invaders are pretty savvy. They kind of pick up on what's going on. Spitfire's pretty sure she recognizes the word on the forehead, which makes me wonder, by the way, Henry, do you think that it says it in English letters because this is a comic for an English-speaking audience? They want them to be able to read it. And so it actually is Hebrew letters and Spitfire's recognizing the Hebrew? Or is this a weird world where in English letter it's written and she's like, Emeth in English, I know that word.
Are you asking me that if in kayfabe it says Emet Aleph Mem Taf to her, but to us we're reading it like it's translated?
Exactly what I'm asking.
Like we're reading like the translation on, basically.
Yeah, this is like watching a movie and getting subtitles at the bottom that show it for you, right? So like, I know that we, the readers, see English letters, but yes, exactly. Like when Captain America looks at the Golem's forehead, does he see English or Hebrew letters?
Oh man, this is good. I think sort of forgiving and generous part of me would like to say that that's what we're supposed to intuit. That like maybe a different comic would say have an asterisk at the bottom saying translated from Hebrew, but that's, I think, yes, in this case she is seeing Aleph Mem Taf for whatever reason she recognized that, and we're, for the benefit of us reading at home, we're seeing Emeth in English.
Right. That's what I want to believe.
That's what I want to believe.
Completely with you. Right. Yeah. So Spitfire recognizes it from her father's library. My favorite joke of the issue is that as the Golem starts freeing everyone, Bucky goes, "Gosh, he tore through those ropes as if they were Christmas tree tinsel." And then Captain America says, "If that the big guy's who I suspect, Bucky, that's not the most apt comparison you ever made."
I love that Cap is you and me in this scenario right now. Like
totally. Like, get your Christian hegemony out of here, Bucky.
And it's like Cap, it's not like Bucky didn't also grow up in Brooklyn. Like they're childhood best friends. It's like they're the only two Gentiles on the block.
Yeah. I think Bucky just like wasn't as up to speed on what was going on. I think Cap was like, "Oh yeah, it's a Golem," because this is like, you know, we're not in Winter Soldier land. We're back when Bucky was kind of just like, "Gosh, I'm a teen sidekick."
Right, of course. Yeah. And all teen sidekicks were sort of portrayed a certain way, you know, quips and so sort of a little dumber than the main hero. Yes. But like
so much gratitude in my heart to Roy Thomas and Ed Summer, whoever came up with that, because it's like, exactly, we would be doing the same thing, like, don't say the Golem tears through things like it's Christmas. Like, I love it. I love the joke.
So good. Thank you, Steve. Now that's the guy who's gonna date a nice Jewish girl in about 80 years.
Yes, exactly. The Golem frees the invaders. On page 27, the Golem gets to confront the face. The face is like looking up and asking, "Why are you looking at me like that? As if you can see into my very soul." I love the terror that's coming through. The Golem is just stone still, doesn't say a thing. The face is getting more and more freaked out. The face offers money. The face offers power, the spoils of war. It's begging the Golem to answer him, and it's just silence. It's like the Nazi being confronted by just the harsh truth of his own crimes, especially as he looks up and sees just the word Emet on the Golem's forehead, right? It's like you cannot plea, you know, your pleas are useless against the truth. This is like, you know, especially in like Jewish texts, truth is associated with God's aspect of judgment. I feel like it's like God's judgment is coming up on the face right now. And it's such a cool, like, Dutch angle of the Nazi looking up at the Golem. It's like the Golem feels so powerful, the face feels so weak. And then on page 30, we don't see the push, but the face falls to his death. Captain America is wondering, could it really be that the Golem is somehow Jacob Goldstein? And then And another thing I love that's so silly, I guess the golem is like sleepy or something because he rubs his fingers against his forehead and erases the Aleph himself, or erases the E, so it just says met or dead. Thankfully, instead of dying, changes back into Jacob Goldstein. He's back.
I
And
wish
then
it didn't say. I wish the excuse me. I wish the narration didn't say accidentally rubs his head, because you're right. It looked like he like tired. He's just kind of like rubbing his head. Like
yeah,
I wish it didn't say anything. I wish it was just either implied, however you want to read it, that it was either intentional or unintentional, that he was, because
right.
it works both ways. It just, if he was doing it intentionally, he's turning back into Jacob Goldstein, or if he's just like a big hulking giant, like I'm sure there are stories of the golem rubbing out and turning it into made by on its own or something like that. So I don't know.
Absolutely.
It was sort of a missed opportunity by hitting us over the head with that. It was accidental.
Yeah, it seems weird. I'm just glad instead of dying, it turns back into Jacob.
Yeah.
So it seems to imply that like Jacob can maybe, similar to the Hulk now, transform, if not at will, at least in certain situations.
If it has water and earth,
Yeah,
a
whatever it
giant
might
basement
be.
where it can spread all it out.
But on page 31, this issue ends in like a powerful way. The invaders want Jacob to go back with them to London because, of course, they want him to come back to his brother, John Goldstein, where this all started, right? The scientist who left Germany and started working for the Allies and then was like a traitor because of the blackmail. Anyway, he refuses to leave because now he says, Jacob says his place is with his people, and he used to stay because he didn't care, but now he knows it's no longer about submission, but rather he knows that one day his people will revolt. He predicts there's going to be an uprising, and whether it succeeds or not, he wants to be a part of that uprising. And we see this incredible image of like the golem throwing up a tank, fighting with the Warsaw Ghetto uprising, essentially. And it's like this powerful image that kind of leaves you hopeful of what might happen. But the invaders leave, and then we get this like very heavy final caption that says, "The invaders are not prophets. They've no way of knowing that untold thousands will perish when the Jews of the Warsaw Ghetto rise in revolt in April of 1943. And what if they did know? Could even they change the inscrutable workings of destiny? Not a whit. So you see, in the end, they are only human beings after all." A really sobering finale that's actually like horrible tragedy is going to happen to all these people in this ghetto. They are all going to die. And then like I like that it kind of confronts the question that we've talked about before, right? Like if these superheroes are around, why didn't they do more? Why didn't they
just stop the Nazis? Right. Yeah. I'm really glad that panel exists, because it would be irresponsible to not like this is just a comic book, and anything can happen. It's silly nonsense. Because if you're gonna do that, and like I said, we talked about this last time. If you're gonna do this premise that superheroes existed in World War II, where forget even the Holocaust for a second, right? Like thousands of Americans died, and thousands of people all over the world, right? You really have to just at least say something about it. Otherwise, it's a little like kind of crass and inappropriate to even do this premise. And certainly with the Holocaust, like why didn't they save all these Jews? So yeah, I mean, I think this is just it's a great issue. I mean,
really fun issue. I think I like this one a lot more than part one, right? Like this went a little deeper into like the Jewishness. It's like very cool stuff to see. I think we jumped over it, but there was like a cool part where like the Face is arguing with Spitfire, and Spitfire's like, "What's the matter? Are you as afraid of women as you are of captured Jews?" And it's just like, I don't know, a lot of fun stuff, a lot of sort of like fist pumping moments.
I would love to see this in like live action or in a cartoon, like a what if episode with this story.
Absolutely.
This could perfectly be 22 minutes.
A Captain Carter instead of Captain America, like leading in and fighting the Golem or encountering the Golem. Yeah, very cool. I really loved it. And you would think that this Invaders series gets left alone, and instead, all of a sudden in the early 90s, we get a return to the world of the Invaders, and believe it or not, a return to Jacob Goldstein, the Golem. Henry, are you ready? Can I introduce our next issue that we're covering?
Please.
As the story of Jacob Goldstein continues, we have Invaders Volume 2, Number 2, from April 1993. This issue is called Havoc in Hollywood. Written by Roy Thomas, penciled by Dave Hoover, inked by Brian Garvey, colored by Paul Becton, lettered by Pat Brosseau, and edited by Mike Rockwitz. In the 90s was the time, it started in the late 80s, but like Marvel loved doing a limited series or two, or 12 in the late 80s and early 90s. Basically, all these different characters did. And so we got this like very 90s style and art and attitude miniseries going back to the Invaders. It was basically like, the Invader series came to an end. I don't know when that series ended, but we were looking at issues in the 70s. I imagine it ended, late 70s, early 80s.
Probably.
And so we get this like 4-issue miniseries that goes back to Captain America and Submariner and the Human Torch and their adventures during World War II, right? It's like, Marvel constantly is going back to these times and showing us issues of like, oh, you never saw this adventure from that time.
And who else is writing it? Roy Thomas.
We're back to Roy Thomas. He's clearly continuing these characters. I will say in advance, I don't like this depiction of the Golem as much as I did the last one.
Yeah.
But we're going to see. There's not too much to go through. But on page 9, the Human Torch and Submariner are going to check on Dr. Goldstein, who was previously John Goldstein, although for whatever reason in this series they keep calling him Johann. Because at this point, Washington doesn't trust him since the whole blackmail episode. Mm-hmm. Which I both kind of get and also feel really crappy about, because there were lots of, like, at least post-war, lots of Nazi scientists who were like forgiven because they started working for the US government, right? Like the idea, like there's just something sketchy to me about the idea of, even though they know he was blackmailed, now they will like never trust him again. So they're going to check on him and see if he's safe. And the Human Torch comments, assuming it's possible for any Jew to be safe today in a land conquered by Hitler. Nice line, like that.
Yeah. And I just like that Roy Thomas is like kind of, if you're going to have 4 issues to do something, like he had 4 issues to bring these characters back. So he goes back to the Golem. That's kind of of all the things,
Yeah, it's fun. I mean, I wonder if I like went back and we read more of the 70s Invaders series, I'm sure a lot more of those characters come back in this also, right? It's like
greatest hit. But if you have 4 issues, like you're gonna maybe hit your greatest hits. So what were those Golem issues greatest hits? I mean,
that's pretty exciting. Yeah,
I didn't read the series, but I certainly liked them.
Well, I think that like one reason that it's a greatest hits, quote unquote, is like we didn't fully get into this, but Spitfire is actually a character who comes up again and again. She became a fairly popular character, I believe. Like I've seen, she's popular enough that she's reappeared over and over again, decades and decades since. And that 2-parter we just covered from the 70s was Spitfire's first appearance. So I think it's like the story has I do agree with you. I think it was a great story. And people probably know that issue among all the Invaders because like it's known as Spitfire's first appearance. And so it's just like that, first appearance issues are always better known than a lot of others.
Can I ask you something?
Yeah, of course.
All right, I'm going to just put you on the spot.
Okay.
I know what happened to Namor and Cap. What happened to her? Like, did she grow old or did she ever appear in the modern era?
This is what I know. Yes, there was a series. I think it was like Captain Britain and MI-13, which is like this cool series in the late 2000s or early 2010s. If I'm remembering correctly, Spitfire gets turned into a vampire. I don't remember if it's Dracula or another one, but she gets bitten by a vampire. And so she's like, forever young because she's a vampire, but she becomes a good vampire.
Okay.
Right, like she's still fighting Nazis and helping them out,
right,
but like occasionally succumbing to bloodlust. It was this really cool series where it was like Captain Britain and Pete Wisdom and Blade and all these mystical heroes working together fighting vampires over in Europe, and like it was a fun Marvel series. But Spitfire is like a prominent part of it.
And whatever happened to the original Human Torch? Did he just get shut off at some point, or
he? I believe comes back in like West Coast Avengers /Avengers Avengers West Coast as was a robot, so it wouldn't make sense for him to be old. But like he comes back every now and then, and I feel like there's a villain at some point that's like the body of the yeah, I think his body gets used for something.
What about Toro the Flaming Kid?
I unfortunately you have reached the edge.
I stumped you.
Okay, yeah, that's what I thought. I believe that the Vision, like from the MCU and from others, the original Vision when Hank Pym made him was made in part
from Human Torch parts,
from the Human Torch's like spare parts and leftovers.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you for catching us up on where the Invaders, where are they now?
Absolutely.
Thank you for that segment.
On page 11, the Human Torch and Submariner go to Johann Goldstein's home and are surprised to find Jacob Goldstein, the brother, and a villain known as Dr. Death. Dr. Death triggers Jacob's transformation into a Golem, and this is the part I hate. Golem is now working for the Nazis.
So stupid.
It's so annoying.
Yeah.
One thing that threw me off, Dr. Death is also, his name is James Bradley. He's known as Dr. Nemesis. I was thrown off when I saw this because do you know why I know Dr. Death, Henry? Once again, I forget if it's the late 2000s or the early 2010s. When the X-Men are living off the coast of San Francisco on the island nation of Utopia, they end up forming this thing that was known as the X-Men like science team or the science club that were all these scientists. And Beast goes and recruits a scientist named James Bradley who goes by the name of Dr. Nemesis and is this exact same guy. I did not realize that Dr. Nemesis, who goes on to become like, like an ornery character, but like a sort of beloved one throughout the like Utopia era X-Men. He appears in Krakoa era of the recent recent issues. He like appears in a lot of Cy Spurrier's writing, like in the
so he's a mutant.
Following. He is a mutant. He's a scientist. He's like a brilliant mind, and he's at this time known as Dr. Death. And apparently at some point he like feels remorse over working for the Nazis, decides to put that behind, and then like ends up becoming an X-Men in the future, an X-Men in the future, which is like kind of cool. But I'm also like, I hate knowing that he once did work for the Nazis. So page 12, Human Torch and Namor are fighting the Golem, and the Golem is now talking, which again, like, I don't like this. All of a sudden, the Golem. I'm surprised Roy Thomas made him do this, but I guess it's just like 90s excess.
Right.
And he's talking in like the worst biblical references that are so cheesy because he says to them, "Then I shall rain blows upon you, both of you, as if they were manna from heaven." Oh
God! So it's like the Pulp Fiction Ezekiel 25:17 rain blows and then manna from heaven. It's like, all right, real deep cuts there.
Yeah, and like you said, it doesn't make like why manna from heaven is meant to nurture you. Why would you be using that to say I'm going to hit you with it?
Like thinking about the 90s, like it'd be so funny if it's like a golem with like a big giant like challah gun, like shooting, braided challah.
Right. If it hits you, the yeast will hit. Yeah.
Eat my gluten.
Or it's got like a matzah ray that'll like completely like make you flat. So in issues 3 and 4, the story continues. There's very little Jewish content other than, I just want to say, like in number 4 at the end, Dr. Death is bragging to Johann, who's been kidnapped, that Jacob is a golem again. Johann ends up being very upset and decides to betray Dr. Death, runs away screaming never again. Another part that really hurt for me to see, Henry, is like basically the invaders escape. Golem is one of the 2 bad guys that's overlooking them. And Golem says, like, you know what? Like, I refuse to stop you. Like, I'm not going to help you, but I'm not going to stop you, basically. Like, I'm not going to participate because my brother's kidnapped. And Captain America tears into Jacob Goldstein, the Golem, saying, like, it's a world war. You can't be neutral. And asks if he's forgotten what it's like in the Warsaw Ghetto. And I just, like, I hated this depiction of a man who was in the Warsaw Ghetto suddenly being neutral. Like, it just doesn't makes sense. Like, it does not feel true to the character of him that we saw to suddenly be like, I have to do anything to protect my brother. He has my brother. Like, I'll do anything he says.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately what happens is that Johann tries to stop Dr. Death and gets shot in the final issue, the final page of the issue, as the invaders reflect on their losses. They include that, like, Johann, the Golem's brother, died. It's very sad. And that is the end of Jacob Goldstein, the Golem, as far as we know.
Wow.
But it's not the end of the Golem in Marvel Comics, because we have now a third Golem to cover, Henry. We started with what seems to be an early Golem, possibly the Golem of Prague, that was discovered in those Strange Tales issues. We moved into Jacob Goldstein, the Golem of the Warsaw Ghetto, and now we're about to meet the Yancy Street Golem.
So we're looking at 4, number 22, September 2005, the Yancy Street Golem, written by Roberto Aguirre-Sacasa, penciled by Valentine DeLandro, inked by Frank Springer, colored by Avalon's Dan Kemp, lettered by VC's David Sharpe, and edited by Warren Simons. So he's the writer isn't editing himself on this one.
So it should be some sharper writing, I suppose.
So if you're confused out and you're listening, I thought Henry just said 2 different numbers. So the name of this title is 4. I'm assuming because of where we're located at Yancy Street 2005, this is 4 as in the Fantastic Four.
Yes, indeed. It is the Fantastic Four. So this was 4 that was under the Marvel Knights imprint.
I remember that.
Yeah. So I believe back in like 1998, a couple of or quite a few of the street level heroes were given new series under this imprint called Marvel Knights. Basically in comic books, sometimes they'll do like imprints, meaning it's still under the main publisher, but they're giving like a certain banner to a few titles. It's like they're in their own little corner of the world. And it proved to be very popular. Those like Kevin Smith written Daredevil issues were very popular. That's where we first got Garth Ennis's Punisher. And Marvel Knights was sort of an early version. It like eventually led to something called Marvel Max, which was like unrated Marvel comics that were so adult and edgy.
There was even a Spider-Man Marvel Knights, I think.
There was, yeah. So basically when those sort of like, I don't know, C or D-list characters, depending how you feel about them, had successful
Wait, Marvel. Did you just refer to Daredevil and Punisher as C or D level?
I'm saying that at the time, Daredevil was not doing very well, and maybe would have been considered C level. I am going to call the Punisher maybe a C or D level character. I don't know. Like, I know a lot of people like him, but like, he's not.
That is a hot take. Wow.
Yeah. All right. At the very least, like C. All right, not D level, but like I don't know. What are you going to say? The Punisher is a B level character?
I would say in the 90s, yes. That like, and maybe I guess you're right. At the time, like those characters had sort of fallen by the wayside a bit. Yeah.
Yeah, like 100%. What Marvel Knights does to them is turn them into A-level characters. It like raises them up, right? But like in the same way that people always forget that like Iron Man was not particularly popular. He was storied and was prominent in the Avengers and had a lot of stuff. Like he wasn't exactly the most popular character.
Was not their best selling.
Right.
Yeah.
Although he certainly had like a rising profile throughout like Civil War and Secret Invasion and all the things that happened. Anyway, getting aside, the point being, once the Marvel Knights formula was popular, they started having like additional Marvel Knights imprints of some of their more popular series, like Spider-Man and Thor. So at this point, Mark Waid, I believe, was writing Fantastic Four, and we probably covered like around that, or like we covered like some issues that were right before the Mark Waid run, like in between, and then Roberto Aguirre-Sacasa, as we just said, was given Thor as this sort of like additional imprint series. And so it ran alongside Fantastic Four. There was sort of like 2 Fantastic Four comics that came out for a while. Here we are with this issue number 4, or number 22. All right, so here we are diving in. On page 1 of this story, we've got narration. We don't know who it's from yet, but we're seeing basically the history of the Lower East Side of New York, and we're seeing it as a history of immigrants with a series of panels that are showing us the transition from one generation to the next. And it lets us know that in the 1890s, we had a time of tenements that were built and Eastern European Jews living there. And we see in this building that it kind of focuses on and showing over the time, we see these steps leading up into a building, and through a window, we see a man with suspenders on sitting down at a table with a book held. A woman, it looks like a woman across from him with what looks like a book or maybe a menu, and then a man standing with either a kippah or a bald spot on, also holding a book. So, like, I can't quite tell, Henry, are they, is this like a shul? Are they davening? Or is this a waiter waiting on a table?
I think they're benching. I think they're doing Birkat Hamazon, grace after meals.
The man who's standing is just like doing the Zimu, and he's leading.
Yeah, he's leading. He's like Rabotai Nevarech, and the rest of them are responding. Yeah.
I love it. So we see that this place transforms over time until it eventually becomes a coffee shop. And on page 2, it mentions that although there's not a lot of vestiges of the old days, there's a few things. Like Katz's Delicatessen at East Houston and Ludlow. Love getting a reference to Katz's. And Ratner's, the kosher dairy place on Delancey near Suffolk, which I loved it. I was looking into it. Ratner's was founded in 1905, though sadly it closed in 2002, and this comic's from 2005. So I guess I don't know what was going on there. I guess either there was not some double checking. They hadn't been to the Lower East Side in a while, or they just wanted to, like date this at a certain point.
Right.
So we find out that the guy narrating is Ben Urich, the reporter, and he is writing for something called The Pulse in the Pulse section, and he is accompanied by Jessica Jones, who you may know from her Netflix series.
We're like, this is like the height, like she's just coming off Alias, Brian Michael Bendis Alias, because remember that was right around the same time as ABC's Alias, and it was very confusing, which is like 2002, 2003. So Jessica Jones is like has arrived as a major Marvel character at this point.
Yeah, and she's basically like a PI. I think at this particular issue, we'll see later, she's pregnant.
Yes,
she's pregnant with Luke Cage's child. And basically in February 2004, a Marvel series started called The Pulse, featuring Ben Urich and Jessica Jones. And basically he would be a reporter reporting on superheroes. And the idea is that within the Daily Bugle, the newspaper that Spider-Man works for, owned by J. Jonah Jameson, that they have a special section of the newspaper all about superhero stories. And that was known as The Pulse, right? So it's cool because that series started like roughly a year before this comic comes out. And so now you just get like when Ben Urich shows up, it's like, oh yeah, he's working on the Pulse section and doing that. So, yeah, and they're sitting down at a diner and they are meeting with, I know for me this is true, I think it might be for both of us, meeting with our favorite Jewish comic book character, The Thing.
Yeah, confirmed. I have a vague memory of us discussing if Ben Urich was Jewish or not on the previous episode. Did we have that conversation? And B, did we confirm yes or no whether he's Jewish?
We have definitely talked about this before, whether it was on the podcast or just like a side conversation. I don't remember at this point. Any listeners who might know, like, please let us know. But I think this issue is going to give us the confirmation of the fact he's Jewish.
Yeah. Then we must have known at some point. I don't know. Yeah.
Absolutely, right. It's also weird, like, now I'm thinking about the fact there was in the 90s, for a while, we were introduced to Ben Urich's nephew. Have you ever heard of him? Phil Urich?
Yeah, he sounds familiar.
What was interesting about Phil Urich is he was the third Green Goblin, except instead of being a bad guy, he was actually a good guy. He was sort of like a punk Euro version of Green Goblin around the time of like 96 of the Onslaught storyline. So there was literally a Green Goblin series for a short-lived period of
Oh
time.
my
And it's like
God.
Green Goblin fighting Sentinels during the Onslaught storyline and things like that.
Oh my
But I'm
God.
just realizing if Ben Urich is Jewish, then like probably Phil Urich is also Jewish. So there's a Jewish Green Goblin, I guess.
Oh wow.
Yeah, yeah. On page 3, Urich narrates that it's well documented that Ben Grimm is Jewish and grew up on the Lower East Side, which I just find so funny because this comic's in 2005, and it's only in 2002 that we had the issue
Right, right.
confirming the thing is Jewish, even though people have been talking about it for decades. So I love that, like, it was such a recent development in the comics, but now it's like it's well documented.
Right. And like in comic time, we're talking 3 years, right? Or 4 years. This is 2006.
This is
So
2005.
this is 5 or 3 years. So in comic time, that's like a week or something. So it's
Yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah.
and I know that, well, when we covered that issue in 2002, I know that Ben explicitly says that like he doesn't talk about it a lot. He doesn't. It's clear that Judaism wasn't a big part of his life, but it never said he, secretly was Jewish. Like maybe it was well documented, but that was the first
Absolutely.
time it came out. Maybe that was the thing that everyone knew in the Marvel universe.
Right, right. I mean, I think it's just an example of like what a literal retcon is, right? It's retroactive continuity. The
Mm-hmm.
moment they had that issue, suddenly it's like, yeah, of course everybody knows that he's Jewish and it's well documented, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't a secret that he revealed. It was confirmation of this thing that retroactively has become true.
Right, right.
Which, like funny enough, I feel like there's like development of Jewish midrash that kind of works that way, where it's like things get learned, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, that's
It's
why we
always
look
been.
backward now. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and well, I mean, and that's cool. I mean, I like that, like, what Carl Kiesel did back then in 2002 was basically say it's okay for all of us to talk about the thing being Jewish. Like,
Absolutely.
you don't have to just reference it vaguely in an issue where he goes to Yancy Street or something, like
Right.
drinking an egg cream, which they're going to talk about.
Yeah.
So it kind of opened up the door for it's always been documented.
Absolutely. And I love seeing it because like the longer we do this podcast, the more we're finding all these like
Right.
mid 2000s and 2010s issues where it's like, oh, what did this writer do playing with the things Judaism? What did this writer do playing with the things Judaism?
Right.
So basically things meeting with Ben Urich and Jessica Jones, and they let him know that people have been dying in accidents on rainy nights. Things from high rooftops keep falling on them around Yancy Street, and they're asking for the thing's help. And the thing's gonna go. And on page 7, the thing thinks to himself how Ben Urich is a schmuck. Hope a gargoyle lands on him.
First of all, I always love your thing. And this is funny to me when like the thing uses a Yiddish word because when people ask me about this podcast, what is it about? And I was like, well, it's explicitly Jewish content. What does that mean? I'm like, and I usually use like sort of the negative of that. I said, well, it's not when a character says oy vey or schmuck, but in this case, it is that because we are covering that.
Yeah. It's like it's very, but like if the only thing that was Jewish about this issue was the fact that he called him a schmuck, we would not be covering it.
No, we'd mention it. We'd say, oh, and another time the thing, right. Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, there are plenty of issues where the thing says schmuck or oy vey that we never cover, right?
Right.
But yeah, it's like, even though I've read this issue a couple times now, there's something as we talk about it, I hope we can like pull out what's going on under the surface, because there's this weird tension between the thing and Ben Urich that like, I don't fully get it.
Okay, so I guess that makes my question irrelevant, was to ask you, like, is that a thing? Like, does Ben not trust Ben Urich? Is that a previous thing? Or, I mean, I've only mostly seen Ben Urich with Spidey, Daredevil, Jessica Jones, J. Jonah Jameson,
right?
Those kind of guys. I don't think I've ever seen these two together. Is that like does the thing not try? I know, like in the Marvel universe, sometimes superheroes don't trust reporters. It's like
Right, but
different
the
than
thing
like the
is,
Daily Planet.
the Fantastic Four has always been the beloved group, right? And
Oh,
like
right. They're
even
like New York's
earlier,
heroes.
right, they're New York's heroes. They're the ones that everyone loves, even when they hate Spider-Man and the X-Men, right? And
Right,
like
right.
there's a point earlier in the issue where the Thing says, "You guys have given the FF plenty of good press, more than we
Mm.
deserved, maybe." So there's
Mm.
clearly not, it's not like
It's
an issue.
personal.
I think he just doesn't like Ben Urich, right? Whether it's because he's a journalist or like it seems to be a sense of like the thing feels like Ben Urich is trying to get under his skin and rattle him, and
Yeah.
I think he does, right? Like there's a point where like throughout the conversation, Ben Urich will say things that seem to be like setting the thing up to say something, and then the thing doesn't take the bait, right? Like
Right,
there's a
right.
point where like earlier on, Ben Urich is narrating to himself, like, I wonder how the thing, like, they kind of treat the thing like he's Jack Kirby, like he's an old man, like he's older than he is, and he's from another time. And so Ben Urich's kind of like, oh, I wonder I was going to wax philosophical about how much better it was way back in the day and how things are
Mm.
different. And the thing just kind of pauses and is like, yeah, things were different, right? So, like,
Uh-huh.
I think that's the tension is like, there seems to be a, like, I don't know if it's a generational divide. Even though in my mind I would think Ben Urich is the older one,
I
but
know. And like to me, Ben Urich seems like not annoying, but he's just sort of this kind of down and out reporter who is just always like kind of nebbishy, but just always down on his luck and chasing the story. And like, he just, I don't know. He doesn't have the pomp and circumstance as Lois Lane and Clark Kent.
no, no, no,
He
no,
always
not at
seems
all.
like he's like what a real reporter is, like,
Yeah,
living on coffee and cigarettes and trying to make rent.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. For whatever reason, there's this weird tension, but the thing thankfully likes Jessica Jones. So the
Mhm.
thing goes off exploring on the streets and reminiscing about his life on Yancy Street. And in the meantime, Jessica Jones and Ben Urich on page 12. Um, sorry, thing goes off searching for this and like sees something on the roof that he goes up to confront. And
Mhm.
in the meantime, Ben Urich and Jessica Jones are meeting with a woman by the name of Mrs. Lowe. That name should be ringing a bell for you listeners, as in Judah Lowe, Ben Bazzalo. But this is a Mrs. Lowe who's telling them about a golem, and she thinks that a creature of magic, the golem, is terrorizing the neighborhood and was unearthed during recent construction. And in fact, Mrs. Lowe says uh, that it was unearthed, it was under a building where my husband and my lady friend's husbands had buried it decades ago. Yeah. And then Jessica Jones says, and this is our confirmation of Ben Urich being Jewish, Urich, Mrs. Lowe, for the goy girl in the room, and she's sort of waiting for an explanation.
Yeah, I didn't love that, by the way.
I realize it's meant to be like her being sort of like self,
It's just,
you
yeah,
know,
she's being self-deprecating. I'm the Gentile in
deprecating.
the room. I get it, but it's not a nice word.
Yeah, I also don't love it. Yeah. And then Urich responds and says, according to legend, and I can't believe I actually just used that phrase, the
Hmm.
golem is a giant made of clay, animated by Jewish elders to protect the weak and the helpless. In other words, and on the
Hmm.
next page, he continues, we're talking about a benevolent creature here. So it's like the big sort of surprise, like, wait, it's supposed to be a good thing. Why
Hmm.
would it be throwing and tossing this stuff? And on page 13, we see the fight sort of continuing as Thing and Golem are exchanging blows. And Jessica Jones is asking, like, if it's a benevolent creature, why would it wake up and suddenly go crazy and start throwing things off buildings and hurting innocent people?
Hmm. Yeah, I was wondering that too, Jess.
Yep, yeah, it is. That is the question at the end of it. And on page 14, we get Mrs. Lowe continuing. Mrs. Jones, my grandfather, my great-grandfather, originally brought the golem over from the old country, where they used it against the people who persecuted us, hurt us, through pogroms, and much, much worse. Over the years, those enemies fell away, more or less. So the golem became a thing without a purpose, directionless, rudderless.
Hmm.
And as she's saying this, we see again, it keeps going back and forth between Mrs. Lowe talking to Jessica Jones and Ben Urich, and Thing and the Golem fighting on a rooftop.
That's always a great comic book. I don't want to say trope, maybe writing device and visual. That's when like comics are great because like you can have this like serious narration and it keeps going back to the action that's happening, and it completely makes sense when you're looking at both things.
Absolutely, seeing them side by side in a way that like you could maybe have a movie that was sort of cutting from scene to scene with like some voiceover narration, but like it's really powerful seeing them like side by side.
Yeah, at the same. You can in a comic book you can look at two, three, four images literally at the same time and get it all. So it's just the magic of comics.
Love them.
And it's interesting. Sorry, one more thing. It's like it's cool that like we have this Mrs. Lowe person. It's a little too coincidental or easy that the descendant of Rabbi Judah Lowe happens to be living on the corner of Yancy and Fifth. Right when Jessica Jones and Ben Urich are there looking for a golem, but it's good continuity. I like that.
I mean, you're right, but I feel like the implication is like if Mrs. Lowe lived somewhere else, that's where the murders were happening and where they began, right? Like it's clear. It's interesting. This actually reminds me of a book that I read for my horror book club called The Tribe by author Barry Wood. Have you ever heard of this book, Henry? Did I ever tell you about it? So The Tribe is this cool Jewish horror book that is about a group of Jews who survived the Holocaust. And when the war ended and the camps was liberated, this group of Jews were better fed than their Nazi captors, and no one understood why. It was like, wait, why are they not skin and bones? They're actually doing well and better than the Nazis. And this group of Jews moves to Brooklyn and they're living in New York, and then awful things start happening. And what you find out is they created a golem, and the golem saved them during the war and forced the Nazis to give the food and such. And then basically at this time, it's the 1980s, in contemporary Brooklyn, the golem, is kept there, but then there's a race. It's during the Crown Heights race riots and sort of the tension between Jews and the black community. Basically, a Jewish man gets killed, and so they bring the golem back, and the golem just starts murdering people in modern day Crown Heights in Brooklyn.
Whoa.
Yeah. And it's about the fact that there's this group of old Holocaust survivors who are the tribe that sort of control it. And it's, the woman who it's an interesting book, and there's interesting tensions. But that's when when Mrs. Lowe is looking at a picture of her husband and her friends' husbands, holding it, that's what it reminds me of, this idea of these older Jewish men that are the guardians of a golem that they once used for a noble purpose. And now they're holding on to just in case and hoping they don't have to use it. But somehow it came to life again. Now in the comic, we see Jessica Jones is wondering, the golem was put to sleep, it's awake again and it doesn't know what to do, so it's lashing out. So Mrs. Lowe supposes that the rainwater over the years has kept the golem from hardening, and it somehow woke up again and is just confused. And on page 15, the Thing simultaneously is realizing what this is, that this is a golem, and in fact says, the legends are as old as dust, and sad to say this ain't the first golem I've mixed it up with. And again, legends aren't quite old as dust, but fine, there's old legends. I love the fact that he says this ain't the first golem, because we got a little reference to Marvel 2-in-1 number 11, when the Thing met the golem, the first one that we covered back in 75. And so on page 17, we get what to me is the highlight of the issue in some ways. The Thing offers to talk, but of course, golems don't talk. They don't respond. And then the Thing decides to try sort of a last minute effort. And he calls the golem by a name. He calls the golem Joseph. And believe it or not, the golem responds, "Who?" And the Thing is very proud of himself and goes, "There we go. Speaking traditionally, golems are always named Joseph, after a half-human, half-demon creature that used to help the Jews out in ancient times. Hey, just because I don't go to temple as much as I should, don't mean I don't know my heritage and mythology." What?
Is that a thing, first of all, that, no pun intended, that all golems are named Joseph? And
Yeah, go ahead,
again,
keep
what
going.
is he learning? What does he think gets learned at Temple and Hebrew school?
Yeah, it's
Like,
so bizarre. I would say also, like, I'm a rabbi. I never heard of this idea that golems are named Joseph. When we first looked at this, I was like, what is going on? This is insanity. And then, Henry, I
oh
did what
my,
I always do. I
oh
did some
no,
research. I am so excited to tell you what I have learned about
oh
this
my God,
idea
oh
of
my God,
golems being named Joseph. All
okay.
right. This is what we have, my friend. You may recall I've referenced the Gershom Scholem book before, looking at the history of the golem. And what we talked about last episode is the fact that, like, the golem story has evolved over time. And so, for example, there was actually an earlier association with a different rabbi of Eliyahu of Helm, that was a Baal Shem, a master of the name, and he did practical Kabbalah. And so he created a golem. And then, like, in later centuries and later generations, people knew the Maharal, Rabbi Judah Loew ben Bezalel of Prague. He was a better known rabbi. People liked him. So they moved the story of the golem that Eliyahu of Chelm made, and they moved it to Prague, right? They ended up making this happen.
Mhm.
So as the story gets written down, and we talked last time about the fact that there was, like, one of the brothers Grimm wrote a version, etc., around 1909, Rabbi Yehuda Yudel Rosenberg, a rabbi who's known for translating the Zohar into Hebrew, right, from Aramaic into Hebrew. He publishes a version of the Golem legend that becomes, if not authoritative, it popularizes the story as being connected to the Maharal more than anyone else does. It's a book that he calls Niflaot HaMaharal, with sort of like wondrous acts of the Maharal. And it's the series of, like, anecdotes and stories of the Maharal creating a golem. And this book has been translated into English. And in fact, I purchased an English copy off of Amazon, so you can get it. And
Mhm.
in this version, it lets you know that the Maharal creates the golem amidst a blood libel when the Jews are in need of protection from their enemies. The Maharal creates the golem on the 20th of Adar 5340, which is in the year 1580, and the golem is destroyed on Lag BaOmer 5350 and 1590. So there's a 10-year period, according to Rabbi Yehuda Yudel Rosenberg, according to this work, Niflaot HaMaharal, during which the golem exists. And then this work is telling you all the different things the golem gets up to in these 10 years. When Maharal is creating the golem, the text that Rabbi Rosenberg writes says, I called the golem Yosef, the Maharal told us, because I drew into him the spirit of Yosef Sheda, who is mentioned in the Talmud, a creature half man and half demon, who also served the sages of the Talmud and saved them a number of times from great calamities. I have to give a huge thank out to the blog Foil Hat Ninja. It's the first website where I found this version of the story connecting Yosef Sheda to the Talmud, and I've gone in. Yeah, so apparently, my guess is that Roberto Aguirre-Sacasa either found a reference to or read this English version of Niflaot HaMaharal, saw this, and took it as, like, okay, I guess it's always named after Yosef. Because especially the fact that it says a half human, half demon creature, and this English translation of it says a creature half man and half demon. Like, it's
Yeah,
clearly referencing it. So
yeah.
now we're no longer in the world of the Golem, Henry, but of course I have to ask, who is Yosef Sheda? What is this thing that's being talked about? Sheda is the Hebrew word for a demon, right? You maybe have heard of Shadim, right? His
Mhm.
name is literally Joseph Demon or Joseph the Demon. So in the Talmud, in a few different places, but we're going to start with Eruvin 43a, there's a discussion about Shabbat that cites a proof coming from a teacher known as Yosef Shida or Joseph the Demon. Yosef Shida is also referenced in Pesachim 110. We basically have these like teachings from a Yosef Shida. So throughout Jewish history, there have been a few developments, and there seems to be two options as to what is going on here. One option is there was once a rabbi named Joseph who was an expert on demons. He was a demonologist. Like, at the time, if this rabbi is great for halakha, this rabbi is great for teaching Torah. You want to know about demons? Joseph's your man. You go to him. And so he got the nickname Joseph the Demon, because he was an expert in demons. The other option, and the one I like so much more, is that in the Talmud, there is a demon who liked to study Torah, and he would sometimes hang out with the rabbis and talk Torah with them.
That's amazing.
Joseph Shida. So Sforno, the Italian commentator, actually takes the opinion that it's a demon. In his commentary on Leviticus 17:7, he mentions Yosef Shida as well as the demon of Rav Ashi. And later, the head of Hungarian Jewry after Hatam Sofer, a guy by the name of Rabbi Yehuda Assad, also thinks it was a demon. And he writes that essentially calling it a human name is a clever way of not saying the destructive demon's name. So in other words, this demon probably has a demon name like Abargagal or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
And like to say it would be inviting danger and chaos. So they just call it Yosef as like a cute little name. There's also a guy in the Talmud, Yonatan Shida, and possibly another. There seems to suggest that there's like domesticated demons that sometimes like to learn Torah and share them with the rabbis. So this little line that at first baffled me has now led me to the wonderful discovery that there's like demons that hang out with the rabbis and study Torah. And the Golem of Prague, according to Rabbi Yudah Rosenberg, was named after this demon who studies Torah.
Wow. Bravo, Rabbi Brandon. That was a tour de force.
Thank you.
That might have been your finest deep dive yet.
It might have been my favorite thing I have learned doing this entire podcast. Like, how incredible. But what we have is, like, once again, and we've seen this before, like an example of a non-Jewish writer doing research and then being like, yep, this just must be the way it is. Because it's like, I'm so glad he did that. I'm so glad I went down the rabbit hole and found it. But it's just still so funny to have this, like, obscure reference and be like, yeah, of course I know my mythology. Like, almost no Jews are going to know that. Like, no, like I don't think there's anyone. But this is also the answer to what we asked earlier, right? When you were saying, like, how did this story of the Golem get popularized? This version of Niflo to Maharal, like that is what popularized the version of the Maharal of Prague, right? Like it like reads, the English translation at least reads like almost like a kid's bedtime story. Like there's like a lot of like, it's like a very easy to read experience. So on page 19, as the Thing and the Golem make peace, the Thing is sort of commiserating with the Golem about the fact they're both relics from another time and they might have like outlived their sort of time. They don't really fit in anymore. And the Thing is being very compassionate and very gentle and brings the Golem down to the East River and says, like, you're not needed anymore, buddy. Like, you can go, quote unquote, back to the river, which seems to be a reference to the idea that you make a golem by adding running water to the clay. And he, says you can go back to the river the same way that he was made from mud and clay of the Moldau River, which, is actually a river in the Czech Republic near Prague. So the implication is that this is the Golem of Prague, moved now to New York and is finally being laid to rest.
Yeah, it's not the first dead body in the East River, I guess.
Ooh, fair enough.
Poor Golem. He's got to live in the East River of all places forever.
Yeah.
Well, I do like that it's sort of, the last image of the Golem is, it's the mud sort of coming away in the water, but the idea that he could return.
Right. Maybe one day he'll return, but
I like that.
It seems that it's sort of, yeah.
This was a great issue.
Loved it. So well written. Roberto has written a number of comics I've really loved over the years, some fun Spider-Man issues. He is known for all of the work that he did writing some of my favorite non-Marvel material, but Afterlife with Archie, this really fun version of Archie featuring zombies and a zombie apocalypse. And also then a version of Sabrina, which were so popular that like these ended up influencing the Sabrina TV show. And I believe Roberto Aguirre-Sacasa became a showrunner for Riverdale. Right. So like that's what he went on to do. So like great writer, but like really loved reading this early work from him. Like you said, fun issue. And those are our 3 golems of the Marvel universe.
I can't believe it. It only took us 2 episodes to get through.
Yeah.
Well, before we sign off and we'll talk about what we're going to talk about next in a minute, I wanted to share with you, Brandon, a couple outside of comics things, sort of comics adjacent Golem things. Now, there is an endless supply of Golem material out there in pop culture, going back, of course, to 1920s Der Golem, the German film. Have you seen that, Brandon?
It's on my list. I have not yet seen it, but
Okay.
it's funny, when I was in rabbinical school at the New York HUC campus, in the bottom floor, where we would often gather and do learning events and discussions and have meals, there were always these pictures hanging, and one was a photo of a stage production of The Dybbuk. And the other was a still frame from the movie of Der Golem, and it was sort of showing this Yiddish and Jewish folklore on the stage and on the screen. So I'd seen it and thought of it, wanted to watch the movie for years, but never got around to it.
All right, well, maybe we'll have a watch along one day. But anyway, the reason why I bring it up is recently you told me about how you've been watching the Universal monster movies, Bela Lugosi.
I got home the other day and had a package from my mom that she sent me. She just sent me a Blu-ray collection of 8 of the classic Universal monster movies.
Oh, nice!
So sweet of her, yeah.
Nice. So, I was telling my friend Rob Kelly about that we were doing the Golem from Marvel Comics, and he said, "Oh, too bad we can't find. There's never been released the makeup tests for Bela Lugosi." And I was like, "What are you talking about?" And he sent me to this blog by a woman named Lisa Marie Bowman and it's the blog post from October 1st, 2022 says Bela Lugosi as Henry Frankenstein. And apparently when Lugosi learned that one of the studio directors for Frankenstein was Robert Florey, he was interested. And the reason why was because this director was interested in Mary Shelley's novel, and they met. And apparently, Florey was heavily influenced by Der Golem in 1920 and modeled the original makeup tests off of that Golem. And Lugosi ended up turning it down because he's an actor. He didn't have any lines, and he also didn't feel like he could act in all of that heavy makeup. And so, that isn't just, I'm not saying that Bela Lugosi almost played the Golem. I'm saying that when he was playing all those great monster roles, he didn't famously play Frankenstein. And the reason why is connected to the Golem. That's
so cool.
Which I just thought it was a cool little thing that of course Frankenstein is heavily influenced by the Golem, both in film and in books. And so, I just wanted to share that little
I love that. Wow.
So the second thing, of course, which brings me to another connection, is you and I both love The Simpsons, and we every now and then we'll share a line on here from The Simpsons. But this week, as I was sort of poring over, we're recording this the week of March 5th, as I was poring over Richard Lewis material. He actually was because he just passed his way. May his memory be a blessing. He was in an episode of The Simpsons, A Treehouse of Horror, from Simpsons season 18, episode 4, Treehouse of Horror 17. And I, immediately contacted you. I was like, please, if you have a chance, please watch this. And this was one of those amazing things where we probably saw it at the time and didn't either think much of it or just kind of liked it, and that was it. So I'm going to read we're not going to do all the audio from it, but I'm going to read the premise of it from this Treehouse of Horror. It's right smack in the middle of Treehouse of Horror. So this is from Wikipedia. The name of the short is You Gotta Know When to Golem. So, which is it's just so funny. At the end of an episode of The Krusty Show, Bart goes backstage to complain about an alarm clock he bought and finds the Golem of Prague, a creature from Jewish mythology. Now, I want to say that the Golem of Prague, the way they animate it here, is exactly the same as the Golem of Der Golem 1920. It's got that goofy bowl haircut and a star on it and whatever. Okay. Christie tells Bart that in the 17th century, the golem was sculpted out of clay by a rabbi and would obey the command written on a scroll and placed in its mouth. Although the golem was created to protect Jewish villages, he would obey any scroll placed in his mouth, regardless of intent. Bart then steals the golem by writing a command for him to come to his home at midnight, and he uses him to carry out several commands, including swinging Principal Skinner up like a yo-yo until he splits in half. Lisa thinks the golem does not like doing the bidding of others and orders him to speak. The golem reveals, in Richard Lewis's voice, that he feels guilty about being forced to commit heinous acts through the years, and to help him feel better, the Simpsons create a female golem out of Play-Doh, and the two are married by Rabbi Hyman Christofsky, of course. So they bring back...
Yeah, it was a lovely Jewish wedding in the show, yeah.
They bring back Rabbi Christofsky. They step on the glass and everything. Meanwhile, the female golem convinces Chief Wiggum not to press charges for Skinner's murder with the promise of pan-fried Lockies. And the female golem is, of course, played by Fran Drescher. So I just wanted to share a couple of my favorite lines in this.
Sure. Go for it.
Krusty says, when describing the golem working for the Jews to do their bidding, he says, like Alan Dershowitz, but with a conscience. And then Krusty later says a great line. He says, I'm going to need a shoebox full of blow to get through this dreck. And I just love the combination of Krusty doing blow and speaking Yiddish. And then later, when Lisa is like, Bart,
did your mystical Jewish monster beat up those bullies?
Bart says,
oh, it's always the Jews' fault.
Which is just so great.
Yes. Very funny line.
And then, later, Richard Lewis has some like very Jewishy lines.
This is the voice I've got. Sounds like I should be selling egg creams in Brighton Beach. That's what we call Jewish humor.
But the best line in the whole episode, this was all leading to this. Richard Lewis says, when they make the female golem out of Play-Doh, Richard Lewis goes,
is she for me? Hanukkah came early this year, which it sometimes does.
And that's just like, it is such an insider baseball Jewish joke that Hanukkah is not on the calendar like everything else. It's on a Jewish calendar, and sometimes it's a little early in December, and sometimes it's late.
I love it. I love it.
That's all. I'd say that was my last like golem thing. I had to, show my respect to the great Richard Lewis and that great line.
Amazing. So fun seeing the golem in all sorts of different media, as you said, from Marvel Comics to the movies to the written records of Niflaot Hamaharal, all the way to what we're doing next, because we're not quite done with golems, Henry. Next time, we're going to be going to Marvel's distinguished competition and continuing the golem train with DC Comics versions of the golem.
You can never have too much golem.
No, as we're learning, you can never have too much. And if you ever did, just erase the olive from their forehead or take the piece of paper out of their mouth.
Perfect.
It'll be fine. Well, it's been so much fun learning more about the golem. Listeners, we look forward to learning with you again next time, talking with you again next time. Watch it out for Yosef Shida and the secrets of the Talmud he might teach you. But until next time, I'm Brandon Bernstein.
I'm Henry Bernstein.
No relation.
Thanks for listening. You can follow us at Jewish Comics Pod on Facebook and Twitter, or you can email us at jewishcomicspodcast@gmail.com. Please don't forget to give us a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts, and you can hit the subscribe button if you haven't already.